Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviours within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behaviour or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. For last week's episode, I posted a part of a conversation I've recently been having with Dr. Minwalla, where we've been diving in a bit deeper on some of the key concepts from the model. And in particular, we were looking at the 3 I's of integrity, intimacy, and integration. So that first part was the deeper look into integrity. And in today's episode, we're going to go through intimacy in more depth. Perhaps we could move on to talking about intimacy, if you're happy to do so. One of the things that kind of strikes me about intimacy as a topic is that if I were to take a sample of men in particular and were to ask about intimacy, what is the intimacy like in your relationship? I would suggest that a high proportion of them, I don't want to pick a number, but a high proportion would interpret that question as being, how often are you having sex in your relationship? There would be this view that intimacy means sex. And then someone with a slightly more developed sense of what intimacy might be might say, no, intimacy is when you buy her flowers, when you share your feelings with her, where you ask her how she's doing. But you kind of started in your introduction piece saying, no, even that's wrong. Intimacy starts with the self. So that initial point is the self-contact. And I think that's just the most important starting point for breaking down this intimacy, this second I. So again, unless there's more you want to add on the previous point, it would maybe be great to move on to there.
I think we've done some good discussion around the integrity piece, so we can probably leave that for a minute. And going into this, the next I, which is intimacy. And yeah, I think that word can conjure up a lot for different people. I think even it might be, like you said, really easy to think immediately, okay, relational skills, attachment, and intimacy. And then you brought up, for a lot of men in particular, intimacy, the word intimacy conjures up sex, just not even relational skills, communication, nothing like that. It can just sex. That's what intimacy means. And it's pretty limited to just that. What I really mean is it's a journey, it's a path, and it starts with the self. If you're trying to make any changes in life, and especially if you're trying to heal and you're in recovery or treatment, right? And a lot of these 3 I's are really for that, in at least first and foremost. Where is that change going to come from? Where's the source of change? It's inside the person. And if they don't know the inside of themselves, it's not going to be very easy for them to change. The more they get to know their thought system, their emotional system, the more they get to know themselves, their history, their shadow, what they've stuffed in the basement and didn't deal with, how to actually sit with emotions and metabolize them and study them and get the data that they're trying to communicate and transmit so that the person can make good decisions in life because they're getting the data. It's like a computer system. Your emotions are delivering data so that you can make the best decisions in life. If you're not metabolizing your emotions, then you're not making the best decisions because you're not getting that data. So there's so much work that needs to be done around emotions, thoughts, relationship with the self, including developing adequate self-worth and self-esteem. If you don't like yourself, if there's self-loathing, if there's pain that you can't tolerate within the self that you haven't dealt with, but in particular, low self-esteem, not liking the self, negative self-concepts, right? Even in sex addiction work, we talk about negative core beliefs. If that's the state of the self, people are going to want to medicate and run away from the self. And I already talked about that's a big contributor to most addictions, is not being able to sit with the reality of the self, not being able to tolerate emotions and pain, and wanting to escape and medicate. So one of the biggest things in recovery is starting to develop a relationship with the self, making self-contact. There needs to be some kind of practice of making self-contact, meaning shutting out the external reality and tuning into the internal reality and developing a relationship with the self that way, right? Meditation, journaling. There's so many different ways to make self-contact and study the self. And over time, there can develop self-awareness, self-knowledge, and over time, someone can decide if they like themselves or not and start developing adequate self-worth. So even just self-esteem and adequate self-worth can't just be rewired right away. There's a whole rewiring system that has to happen. First, just teaching people how to even contact the self and get to know the self and get to know and feel comfortable with emotions and start studying their thoughts, including entitlement and sexual entitlement and all kinds of things that most men don't think about intentionally. So we have to actually go uphill and intentionally study these things. Otherwise, by default, they're not in our consciousness. And how to sit with emotions, especially for men, that's been decimated. We learn boys don't cry from day one. So there needs to be a lot of work on just how to deal with emotions and being just aware of what one is feeling and then learning how to speak about it. So there's so much work around developing a relationship with the self. And a big part of that is just learning how to develop adequate self-awareness and self-worth so that you don't want to medicate and run away from yourself. And once you establish that, then you can be on the journey towards self-love. But forget about self-love in the beginning. That's like a distant ideal. Just how about getting to know yourself, developing a practice of self-contact, self-awareness, and developing adequate self-worth, just so you can stand upright psychologically. It's like a vertebra in your spinal column. Adequate self-worth. And then you can start seeing, why can't I make these changes? What's getting in the way of me being honest? You have enough of a relationship with the self where you can start being reflective about what issues are getting in the way. You have enough capacity to reflect on your thoughts, to name emotions and share what's going on emotionally. So that's what the second eye is about, intimacy. It's first and foremost, we have a very damaged relationship with the self. A lot of people literally, they get up and they're paying attention to external reality all day until they go to sleep. They get up, external reality, there is no developing a relationship with the self. Most of us grew up, nobody taught us we needed to develop a relationship with the self, right? It's like flossing or brushing your teeth. It's like every day you should just take care of yourself, check in, what's going on? Are you okay? How you doing, self? And get to know the self. That's intimacy with the self. For example, if I said, if you picked up the phone and called somebody, just picture anybody, and you call them every day for a year, and you just listen to them speak honestly about what's going on with them for 1 or 2 minutes. After a year, you'd probably get to know that person pretty well. If you picked up the phone and called them every week for a year and just listened for 1 or 2 minutes, them expressing their truth, you'd still get to know them pretty well after a year. If you did that every month, every 6 months, if you never pick up the phone, you're not going to know them at all. Now, use that and apply that to yourself. How many times do you pick up the phone and say, "Hi, self, how are you doing?" and listen? If you do that every day after a year, you're going to be more intimate with the self. You're going to know yourself better. If you do that every week, it's pretty good. If you do that every month, it's all right. If you never do that, you are not developing a relationship with the self. You are in a state of self-exile, self-alienation. You're avoiding the self. You're avoiding developing that, which means you're in a state of acute pain as a human being, right? Because you don't even know the self and you're running away. So how can you have adequate self-worth? So a lot of basements are built because people are in pain and they don't know how to cope, and they build secret sexual lives. They don't have a voice. And a lot of it is they're not very conscious of what's going on inside emotionally on a deeper level, what childhood issues are coming up, because there's no relationship with the self. There's no awareness, and there's no self-esteem. There's a lot of pain and no self-esteem. How can you survive with no self-esteem? So you're going to want to medicate. So if you want to get better, you have to develop adequate self-worth. You have to develop some relationship with the self just to stabilize yourself. And that's called developing ego strength and ego health. Ego strength and ego health. Yeah. And that's really what the second I is: intimacy with the self, picking up the phone and saying, "Hi, self," and getting to know the self, and slowly holding the self, good, bad, or ugly, and getting to know the self and developing intimacy, connection with the self. If you don't know yourself, you don't like yourself, and you're in a relationship with someone else, you're at high risk of extracting from them what you don't have for yourself. And you don't have much to give. And a lot of relationships are like two empty glasses, and they're both trying to fill each other from each other. They don't have much to give. You want to have in a relationship a strong sense of self and a lot of love for yourself. And from that place, you can give.
So just what you added at the end there, I think it's so profound because, I shifted us to this second I, talking about viewing intimacy as sex, then shifting from there to viewing it as the way I communicate with other people or the way I share with other people. And as you just alluded to, if I am not in self-contact and if I haven't developed the internal resources of esteem and these things you're talking about, the danger is if I think intimacy is just about sharing with other people, then you just said, I'm going to end up maybe extracting from them or just dumping all my stuff on them. And I'm using them almost as like a therapist or a lightning rod or something like that. So I guess that's what jumped out to me when you were speaking, that's why intimacy starting with the self isn't just a nice idea, it's actually foundational to then being able to have true intimacy with other people.
Absolutely. And like I said, if you're in recovery and wanting to change, where's the source of change going to come from? It's inside you. If you don't know the inside of you, how are you going to change? Because the change doesn't come from outside, it comes from inside. And a big part of the problem is a wounded relationship with the self, not knowing the self, not being aware of emotions, not liking the self, hating the self, self-loathing, low self-esteem, no confidence. That's not healthy.
Doesn't give you much to work with in terms of recovery. And no therapist, no specialist, certainly not your intimate partner. No one else can do that work for you. No one else can fix you. And so, again, imperative that it starts with the self. And you also said something about slowing down. And I think we started this whole conversation with your sort of process of transitioning or approaching and transitioning into what you call extraordinary space. And again, when I'm speaking with clients, particularly when it's a group of men, this idea of being intentional and slowing down and actually thinking about self-contact. And we have this really simple idea in the model, really simple acronym, WTF. Easy to remember for obvious reasons. But in this context, standing for what am I thinking, what am I feeling? And another thing that, just like just speak the truth, IAR, so simple, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, doesn't sound complicated at all. But for men early in this process, for men who have built secret sexual basements, for people who are dealing with things in the basement rather than the house, that's a really difficult question to answer sometimes. Something as simple as what am I thinking and what am I feeling right now? And sometimes it's almost 1,000-yard stare. Well, what do you even mean? It's like it's a new concept. So you said something about really slowing down. And I've just introduced that idea again of the extraordinary space and creating the conditions, the vibrations where that can happen. So I wonder if there's any more you can add about that and how that is so difficult, because we're usually in doing mode. We're in ordinary space. We're on autopilot in many ways.
I think going back to masculinity and how we're socialized is a good place to start, because intimacy with the self, that is not part of masculine socialization. In fact, it's the opposite. The way we're socialized as men and boys is to not value the self, to not humanize the self. In fact, to objectify ourselves into non-human objects like lean, mean fighting machine or workhorse. That's an animal. That's not a human. That's a machine. That's not a human. To be stoic, non-emotional, to not have feelings, to not value using your voice and instead violence. And what kind of meaning in life is that going to result in? A very painful, crippled, disturbing sense of life if you're being encouraged to have no feelings, objectify yourself, choose violence over voice, not be even valuing the self, right? In male culture, if you said, hey, let's develop a relationship with the self, let's call the self up on the phone every day and listen, right? That would not be encouraged at all. That would be devalued. You'd be ridiculed. Get out of here. We don't need to develop a relationship with the self. If somebody's objectifying themselves, then it's very likely they'll be more easily able to objectify others. If they haven't humanized themselves, it's going to be easy for them to dehumanize others. So if we're grooming men to objectify themselves, That's part of the problem in terms of male violence is they're at high risk of objectifying others and not humanizing others because they never humanize themselves. And male socialization does not humanize men. It dehumanizes them and does the exact opposite of humanizing them. A human is encouraged to have emotions. Boys are not. And developing intimacy with the self is not part of male socialization. It's also just not part of a socialization period. Like I said, most of us don't grow up. Hey, this is how you brush your teeth. Hey, this is how you eat healthy food. Hey, this is how you take care of your ego and internal reality by checking in with yourself and creating self-contact. And you need to be working on understanding your emotions and humanizing yourself. So we don't grow up with any of that usually. And then masculinity really takes us far away from that. The word intimacy itself is devalued in masculine consciousness and grooming. Intimacy is automatically devalued. Men are uncomfortable with that word. And like you said, it gets reduced to just sex. That's part of the discomfort with that word. But really, that word means how to love. And so it's one of the most important things about human life is how to love, how to transmit love. How are you going to be a parent? How are you going to be a father if you can't transmit love? And yet love, intimacy, completely devalued in terms of masculinity. The concept of love is not something that male culture values. It's feminized, degraded. So that intimacy word really means love. And it's a big problem if you don't have that vibration.
Yeah, it seems pretty important. So we've, talked about integrity, but then intimacy. And I guess we're really focusing there on intimacy with the self. And when we're talking about the three eyes, that's what we're primarily talking about as the starting point. But I think before we move on to integration, I think it's such an important thing to talk about, intimacy with the other. If we maybe bring in a little bit of that in terms of we're thinking about deceptive sexuality trauma. Obviously, there are all of these, you mentioned at the start in the model, the 22 rooms of trauma. There is a wide scope of traumatic impact on the partner and on the now injured relationship itself. And so it strikes me that one of the great challenges here is you're saying for men who have built and maintained a secret sexual basement and then a discovery has occurred, they are someone who has been shaped potentially to not be able to be in self-contact, to not have integrity, to not be intimate with the self. And they are now tasked with growing in those things, growing in those really difficult, complex things in an environment that is almost holding a mirror up to them. So you're talking about the intense shame a person might carry. And now the partner's pain in many ways almost holds a mirror up to the ego. This is what I've caused. This is the pain that I've caused. I have abused someone. We've introduced that word abuse. That's not a light word to carry. And so there's this sense of wanting to build this intimacy, but doing it in such a difficult environment to do it. So, I mean, it makes it even more important. But I guess I just want to almost highlight and then get your thoughts on that second challenge of if we just stop at integrity. So if a guy's in recovery, he's not acting out anymore, and maybe he's stopped lying or at least significantly reduced the integrity abuse, as we called it, the partner can still feel very unsafe in that environment if he's not able to be authentic. We talked about accurate and authentic in that IAR acronym. And so I wonder about that as well. Like if the guy just stops with integrity, I mean, that's a great progress he's made. But if he's not able to be connected with the self and not able to communicate that in some way, then how does the partner feel safe? Are the vibes still off? Are the frequencies still wrong? Because, okay, he's not appearing to lie anymore, but I still don't really know who I'm married to or who I'm in relationship with. So I wonder again if it feels like we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't briefly touch on that and how that impacts the partner in a relationship also. So again, I wonder if you can talk briefly about that and how intimacy then leads on to how we communicate within the relationship.
Yeah, so um like we said, so we start the journey with the self, intimacy with the self, but that really is a journey. And so the I, intimacy, continues to have meaning when we get to the relationship as well. And when we talk about the relationship, then you want to first just acknowledge the first I, integrity. That's the first thing that needs to stop is lying and IMR, because that's the abuse, that's the harm. So first intervention in the relationship, reduce the abuse, stop the lying, stop the gaslighting, stop the intentional manipulation of reality, and then also stop all those integrity abuse behaviors, minimizing, rationalizing. There's a lot of defensiveness that gets in the way of relational healing. It also includes finding your voice and telling the truth and learning how to speak accurately and honestly, including a disclosure and a lot of responsibility taking and ownership without defense. So that all relates to the integrity, but it's necessary and important in developing intimacy. So the dishonesty and the abuse is the first thing that sets the stage for deepening healthier intimacy and connection between two people. Um, Once you get to that, the journey continues with not just learning how to be accurate and honest, but now how to be authentic, which means what? How to share using the human voice, what's going on inside your ego, your internal reality, how to share from that place, not just news, weather, sports, and the truth about facts, how to share about what's going on inside of you as a human being, which means being able to share about internal experience, including emotions, including fears, resentments, hurts, worries, anxieties, stress, how to communicate about all of that. All of that is really important because the person, the partner who found the basement, their partner is like an imposter, a stranger. A lot of them don't recognize that person, never even conceived that the person they thought they knew could have that kind of double life, right? So beyond the truth, they also just want to know, who is my partner? Who are you? Can you share with me who you are? And the more he's done ego work and knows himself, like we've been talking about, and developing intimacy with the self, the more he's going to gain skills on how to use his voice to share about the inside of him and what's going on, who he is, and share authentically. And now, intimacy here means, how do I share authentically about not just news, weather, sports, but about deeper, meaningful things about who I am? What is my emotional reality? What issues do I hold? Can I talk about my emotions? Can I talk about my triadic core and sexuality honestly? These are higher level skills now after learning how to reduce the abuse and be honest. Now you have to work on authenticity, which is another whole developmental path that never ends, actually. For any of us, we're always learning how to deepen our authenticity, how to share more of our true self, how to overcome fear and take risks and be more vulnerable. These are all higher level intimacy skills that go along with the second I, intimacy, when we get to the relationship. Yeah.
Again, it sounds like a much fuller, richer version of recovery than just, I'm not acting out anymore and I've learned some empathy statements and some validation statements. This is something bigger. This is true self-connection, and then the ability to use the human voice to connect with another person on that authentic level. And so also important to just say again, repeat again what you said, that's the next step. We start with the integrity, the most important clinical issue, reduce the abuse, then we can move on to intimacy with the self. Then when the intimacy with the self grows, we can move on to intimacy with other people that's based on authenticity.
Exactly. Yes. And that's going to be quite a journey, especially for men who've never valued any of that and have never practiced any of that and have never been encouraged to be like that even.
I guess this is the definition in many ways of deep change, not quick change. We're not talking about a 2 or 3 month treatment program to do these things. We're talking about actually a lifelong journey. You've mentioned there, I don't think anyone is perfect in integrity or authenticity, unless that's just me. But I'm pretty sure that's the case. So we're talking about a lifelong journey here.
Yeah, remember the 3 I's? Those are paths to be on. And really, every human can be on the journey of the 3 I's, developing more honesty always, and always having the choice to be honest or dishonest, and valuing integrity as a way to be healthy in life psychologically. That's very important. When you have integrity inside, you feel light and clean, and it's easy to have self-esteem. When you're lying, you're changing those vibrations. You're developing a system within yourself that's toxic and harmful to yourself. It's hard to feel good when you're holding dishonesty within. You lack integrity. That's not a state of health for any human being. So whether you're at a basement or not, the 3 I's are health promoting for all humans. The second I, intimacy with the self, intimacy with others, truly revealing the truth and feeling connected in truth and knowing, that's intimacy with the self, intimacy with others. That's a lifelong journey, and essentially how to love the self and others, how to bring that vibration into the system, right? So intimacy is all about love and developing that capacity with yourself and others. You'll always be on a journey of that. That's not easy in this life. It's not easy to even carve out time in our lives for self-contact. So that's a lifelong journey. Loving yourself, loving others, intimacy. And then integration, putting it all together and living one life, not compartmentalized, and learning how to own your shadow and integrate your shadow. That's a lifelong journey. Every moment in life is an opportunity to integrate more. Yeah. So these are paths to be on for all humans, the 3 I's.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwallamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.